Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
In 1910, the following advertisement for the Rochester Fair appeared in local newspapers.
The management, ever on the alert for the latest and best in the amusement world, has secured for this year, at an enormous expense, the greatest attraction of the century, a genuine flying machine, and there will be daily flights by the Wright brothers aeroplane, not a balloon or an airship, but the real flying machine, by which man has, after ages of effort, actually conquered the air. And now he flies like a bird. These birdmen, or aviators, are under contract to fly 6 times, and will positively fly every day of the fair, a sight worth going hundreds of miles to see.
Thousands of people attended the fair in Rochester in 1910 to see the Wright brothers airplane. This would be the first time that a heavier-than-air aircraft would fly in New Hampshire. Before the Wright brothers agreed to demonstrate their plane in Rochester, they had to verify that the fairgrounds were suitable and safe for their plane. The Rochester Fair Association sent diagrams and measurements of the racetrack to the Wright brothers to assure them that the fairgrounds were safe for takeoffs and landings of their plane. The pilot of the airplane was Archibald Hoxsey. He was an employee of the Wright brothers and was trained by them to fly their plane. The Wright brothers wanted to display the airplane to the American public. In doing so, they wanted to retain a share of the newly emerging aviation market. Archibald went across the country to the fairs, demonstrating the airplane to people who had never seen an airplane before. Even though the Wright brothers employed Archibald, he had to furnish a mechanic with his own money to accompany him on exhibition tours. His contract called for repairs to be made at his expense and to deliver the plane back in pristine condition to the Wright brothers.
The Rochester Fair paid $5,000 for the Wright brothers plane. Never before had they paid so much money for a performance. However, this was a deal they could not refuse. It was a guaranteed moneymaker. Admission to the fair was 50 cents in 1910, and that year broke all previous attendance records, exceeding the previous year by over 7,000 admissions. The fair also generated revenue by charging 15 cents to go into the tent where the airplane was stored. Archibald's contract with the fair required 2 flights a day from September 27th through September 30th. In addition, he was to bring a passenger if anyone was daring enough to go for a ride. A train transported the disassembled Wright Flyer Model B to Rochester. Pieces of the airplane were brought to the fairgrounds where the plane was assembled. The first day of the fair, Tuesday, September 27, 1910, was an historic day. On that day, the first flight in New Hampshire occurred. Archibald stayed in the air for more than 15 minutes, performing somersaults and other stunts. The next day was very windy. It was so windy that the plane was unable to get airborne. Every time Archibald tried to get airborne, the wind would send him back to the ground. On his final attempt at 5:30 p.m., he ran into the fence on the racetrack and damaged his plane. Archibald and his mechanic spent the night repairing the plane, and he was able to keep flying. He amazed and delighted the patrons of the Rochester Fair for the next 2 days as he flew without incident. 10 days after Archibald Hoxsey flew at the Rochester Fair, he was at the St. Louis Fair. There, one of his passengers was none other than Theodore Roosevelt. The former president became the first president to fly in an airplane. Sadly, Archibald Hoxsey's life was cut short a few months after entertaining thousands at the Rochester Fair. On December 30th, 1910, he set the world altitude record of 11,474 feet in Los Angeles. The next day, Archibald attempted to break that record, and he lost control of his airplane at 7,000 feet. The plane plummeted and crashed to the ground. 1910 was just the beginning of airplane shows at the fair. During the 1910s and 1920s, airplane shows at the fair were a common occurrence. However, by the 1930s, the airplane was not considered a novelty anymore, and the public lost interest in airplane shows. An era had passed as the airplanes stopped coming to the Rochester Fair.
And this ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.